It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
Some movements, albeit in a rather imperceptible form, persist long after the cause that gave rise to them has vanished. They make no noise, they demand no attention, they never present themselves as anomalies. They simply remain active, like background processes forgotten on the periphery of a system. You brace for a resistance that no one is putting up anymore. You maintain a caution born in another era. You repeatedly perform checks tied to a long-dissolved risk. You bring into a new situation a posture built for a scene that no longer exists. The cause is gone, yet the form was never notified of it. The body does not update its archives at the same speed that circumstances change. A function may exhaust itself, relationships may alter, the environment may become less hostile, and a necessity may lose its essence. Meanwhile, a sequence of actions continues to replay, having learned the route so well that it no longer requires validation. This is how residual habits survive, neither as anyone's choice nor as a mistake, but simply as an ordinary relic of the past. This is observable just as much in outward gestures as in internal processes, which are harder to spot because they don't move physical objects or leave behind clear footprints. Anticipating criticism before it arrives, weighing every phrase as if someone is already poised to use it against you, building a defense against an accusation no one has made, feeling responsible for a balance that no longer depends on you. These are actions without a stage, yet not without weight. The nervous system often holds on to old solutions with a maniacal devotion that could even pass for intelligence, and in some cases, once was. Before becoming a vestige, a gesture almost always had a valid reason. It protected something, simplified something, prevented a loss, or reduced vulnerability. However, it would be a mistake to treat it solely as an error that needs to be corrected. Even useless forms have a biography. If you view them solely as defects, you miss the time when they were necessary. But if you continue to treat them as necessary, you keep paying tribute to a past that no longer does you any favors. Certain actions survive because they are never explicitly put on trial. They are too insignificant to warrant a review, and too deeply integrated to feel foreign. You keep arranging things according to an order that belonged to a previous life, checking a signal that no longer announces anything, avoiding a zone of conversation that has lost its original danger. None of this is serious enough to become a problem, and for that very reason, they remain. Form outlives function far more often than it might seem. Here, it would be fitting to use a highly technical term like perseveration, albeit in a broader context. In some cases, it denotes the continuation of a response after the stimulus has changed, but more generally, in everyday life, it describes a broader dynamic. The mind can continue reacting to conditions that no longer exist, or that are present only as a resemblance, an echo, an emotional temperature. The past doesn't need to return in its entirety. Sometimes the present just needs to resemble it slightly, and then the old organization of processes is triggered anew. The subtler nuance is that these surviving forms don't just huddle in some harmless corner. They continue to structure the day. They allocate attention, drain energy, and determine the tone by which you assess certain situations. A caution no longer needed can stall intimacy. An automatic readiness to help can saddle you with tasks no one ever assigned you. An old strategy of control can turn a neutral detail into a center of gravity. Form, even after losing its function, remains capable of generating consequences. The environment feeds this inertia. Things dictate actions, and they aren't always the actions that still make sense. The physical arrangement of objects can summon old behaviors. A specific hour can reactivate an entire sequence. A particular kind of silence can trigger a reaction formed somewhere else entirely. Memory here is not mystical in nature. It is much more concrete, more mundane. It lives in associations, in well-worn paths, in the ease with which the body finds an exit it has used before. Some thoughts, too, turn into heavy furniture. They no longer explain the present, yet they remain standing in the middle of the room. You have to walk around them, reckon with them, adapt your movements to their presence. An old interpretation can continue to produce effects long after it ceases to be accurate. It forces you to read a gesture through a scratched lens, to wait for an aftermath that never arrives, to take a stance no one forced you into. It is a pitiful ghost, stripped of its stage, yet solid enough to block your path. The difficulty lies in recognizing this vestige without trying to erase it too hastily. Some movements fade away only when you stop feeding them with your former meticulousness. Others require an actual deviation from the course, perhaps a tiny one, but repeated often enough to let the body know the world has changed. Still others linger for a long time. You no longer fully believe in them, but they haven't dissolved yet, like old road signs on a route no one drives the same way anymore. Sometimes it all starts with dissonance. You notice you are doing something with disproportionate intensity, or with a pedantry unsuited to the situation. A phrase slips out on its own. A hand reaches out to double-check. The body prepares to retreat. The mind offers up an old explanation. And then, for a brief moment, the cause never materializes. All that remains is the movement, bare and slightly delayed, forced to demonstrate the fact of its own survival. And nothing special happens, at least not immediately. You might even allow the movement to complete itself. Watch it run its course. Observe how little present it needs to keep going. Sometimes an automatic behavior loses its power precisely when it is seen without being dramatized. It doesn't collapse, dissolve, or suddenly make sense. It simply loses some of its grip. It stops feeling like destiny and turns into a form left to idle. Our days are full of such forms. Some are harmless, even touching. Others take up far more space than they claim to. There is no need to tidy up everywhere, as the obsession with constantly updating everything can also turn into a procedure, and perhaps one of the most exhausting ones. It is enough simply to notice that certain movements no longer belong entirely to the present, even if they continue marching through it with an air of absolute competence. And maybe, at that very moment, whatever is redundant and irrelevant will simply slip away, quietly and without a fuss. See you in the next episode.